Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. So Chiori is here, and this is the perfect time to talk about the newest, hottest topic in town, power creep. In this video, I'll be going over my top 5 notable instances of power creep in Genshin Impact. Upon Genshin Impact's release, people were clamoring for a real 5-star DPS character, and at the time, that character happened to be Diluc. But really quick, a big shout out to Tower Fantasy for sponsoring today's video. Tower Fantasy is the ultimate anime-style free-to-play open-world MMORPG on both PC and mobile. Fight epic bosses, ride on epic vehicles, and rave at epic disco parties. Tower Fantasy is marketing right now because they've been cooking up the hottest collab in town, Evangelion. That's right, the trauma-inducing cult classic is coming in version 3.7. where you can LARP as everyone's favorite twin-tailed tsundere, Asuka. As the Executor, you'll team up with 3 Evangelion multi-purpose humanoid decisive weapons and the Vera Guardians, all while piloting the original mecha of Tower Fantasy to take down the ever-so-menacing angels. Take control of Asuka through all her trauma and obliterate all her enemies in the world of Tower Fantasy. There will also be new Evangelion-themed Frontier Clash missions available for a limited time only from March 12th to April 30th. But wait! That's not all! The new adorable smart servant, Pen Pen, will also join the battle on March 12th. And you'll even get the brand new retrofitted vehicle, Soul Plugs, to zoom around the overworld. Now is the perfect time to return to Tower Fantasy to experience this limited time Evangelion collab event, where you'll get tons of rewards like red nuclei, dark crystals, special vouchers, and more. Smash that link down below to support me and to check out Tower Fantasy. Huge thanks to Tower Fantasy for sponsoring today's video. Some players even spent an ungodly amount of money to try to get our favorite Batman LARPer. Sure, Kaching was also in the game, but let's be real. Diluc already had a very solid team on release with Xingqiu, Bennett, and Sucrose. Kaching was admittingly not in the best spot due to the lack of Dendro and Aggravate. As such, Diluc was the hottest dude in town. Although little did the community know that the true Pyro DPS was hiding under plain sight. Anyway, Klee was released shortly after, and while she was good at the time, both her and Diluc were fairly comparable to each other. However, all that changed with the release of Hu Tao. Hu Tao pretty much benched Diluc for a very long time, since she also demanded the undivided attention of our solo waterbender at the time, Xingqiu. And for the longest time, practically 3 years later with Shenyun's release, Hu Tao has been the top Pyro DPS character. Nowadays though, things are looking up for Diluc, but there's no doubt in my mind that, at least for a very long time, Diluc was one of the earlier victims of power creep, with Hu Tao taking his spot for the best on-field reverse vape Pyro DPS character in the game. Number 4. Another major instance of power creep actually occurred before Hu Tao. Again, Diluc was heralded as the gold standard of DPS characters. This was in an era where we had characters like Razor who we were relying on to deal damage. But then came a certain mountain-dwelling critter in version 1.3, a literal goat. Ganyu redefined our expectations from a DPS character, power creeping pretty much all of the previous DPS characters. Her being able to output colossal 650 multipliers every couple of seconds at the time was completely unheard of. Even by modern standards, Ganyu is still a decent and usable character. And this is absolutely insane to think about, considering she was released all the way back in version 1.2. Personally, I think Ganyu power creeped the previous DPS characters prior to her release, except for perhaps Tartaglia, and redefined what we as a community expected from DPS characters moving forward. Number 3 is an interesting one, and it's actually Jon Lee. When Jon Lee was released, well, unfortunately, he was released in a fairly underwhelming state. But after literal death threats to MiHoYo employees, MiHoYo decided to buff Jon Lee beyond our expectations. Originally, MiHoYo intended for specific shields to be good against specific elements. For example, Diona's shield absorbs cryo damage 2.5 times more effectively than other types of damage. Jon Lee's original shield absorbed geo damage more effectively than other types of damage. With this idea in mind, I'm sure miHoYo planned to release certain characters to counter specific types of enemies. But after they buffed Jon Lee, they threw this idea into the trash. And honestly, it's for the better. Nothing is less exciting than getting a character just so you can mitigate one specific element of damage. But now that Geo shields absorb 1.5 times the damage from all sources, instead of the original idea of absorbing Geo damage more, well, Jon Lee power creeped all the previous shielders. In fact, Jon Lee ended up power creeping all future shielders, which is actually crazy to think about. Sure, each of the other shielders have very limited niches they can fulfill, but all of their shields are effectively power crept when compared to the CEO of GEO. The second major instance of power creep is, in my opinion, Hyper Bloom. Before Hyper Bloom, transformative reactions were not generally relied on for damage, with Swirl being the best one by a long stretch. But with the release of Hyper Bloom, that all changed and the damage floor for teams was raised tremendously. Now if your team deals less damage than Hyper Bloom, there's pretty much no reason to use that team and you should just use Hyper Bloom instead. In particular, Hyper Bloom power crept the second Abyss team. Back in the day, you'd be struggling to fill both sides of your Abyss teams with two different crit-based teams. But after Hyper Bloom, you can simply consolidate all your farming for one single crit-based team, and then use Hyper Bloom on the other side with terrible artifacts and one electric character with a bunch of elemental mastery. Overall, I think Hyper Bloom was the second largest instance of power creep, essentially raising the damage floor for teams and nullifying any team that couldn't outdamage Hyper Bloom. And the number one biggest case of power creep is Aloy. Hoyoverse really outdid themselves by giving us all a free 5-star character. Aloy was the power creep that everyone asked for, which is power creeping their generosity when it comes to the rewards that they give us. Aloy also redefined the pigeon hunting meta with her completely broken passive, so now even melee characters can be better than garbage tier for traumatizing Timmy. And there you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on your way out. Alright, let's be real, we all know what number one is going to be on this list, and it's all Chiori for Albedo. I get it, Albedo is not the most popular character around, but still, Chiori's release is one of the most direct power creeps in Genshin Impact history. Chiori is the first instance of direct and true power creep for a featured 5-star character. With even a single doll, Chiori is already outdamaging Albedo on the teams that he previously enjoyed being on, and with 2 dolls, it's not even close. Granted, Hoyoverse tried to mitigate this power creep by just a little bit, by making it so Chiori needs her Constellation 1 to function with Geo characters that don't make constructs. Basically for Navia. But this ended up backfiring and making it feel like they created a problem and now are trying to sell you the solution through her Constellation 1. Sadly, for Chiori to have any amount of viability in the modern meta with Albedo's kit, she absolutely needs to power creep Albedo, since Albedo just doesn't really do anything in today's meta to justify pulling for him in the slightest. I was hoping for Chiori to be a Geo support character that could be used more generally and not just the souped up version of Albedo. Perhaps in the future there will be a character that somehow buffs Geo constructs, but until that day comes, Albedo is in my opinion the most power crept thing in Genshin Impact. If you enjoyed this list, don't forget to like and subscribe, as that really helps my channel out a lot. Overall, power creep isn't always a bad thing in video games, and let's be real, 4-star characters are regularly getting power crept in Genshin Impact. However, for high-valued limited characters like Albedo, one could argue that this is more problematic. But as the game matures and we get more and more overlapping roles, this is arguably inevitable. We also have Arlecchino coming, and if she's not a Pyro DPS character based purely on her design and lore, I'll eat a hat. And we'll have to see if she power creeps any of the current Pyro DPS characters that we have. Let me know if you agree with or disagree with this list, and let me know other instances of power creep that I did not mention here. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Went to Lose, signing out.